Hey, my name is Austin Goen. I'm the lead pastor here at Bellevue Christian Church. We're so glad you're here with us today on Sunday. And I have always loved the story of a person named Eric Liddell. He spent much of his life as a Christian missionary in China in the first half of the 20th century. But what he's most famous for is something that happened when he was just 23 years old, just a few years before he would catch a train to China where he would spend the rest of his life. And he's 23 years old, and it's the 1924 Paris Olympics. And Liddell was a sprinter who had qualified for the Olympics in both the 100-meter and the 200-meter. And he was also famous for the quarter mile. And there's a particular story about him where he got tripped up in a quarter mile and ended up actually catching up the distance and finishing and winning that race. But he found out that the qualifying heats in the 1924 Olympics for the 100-meter were on a Sunday. And for him, that was the Lord's Day. And so one of his convictions, as somebody who ran a lot and saw that as a work for himself, one of his convictions was not running on Sundays. And so he opted out of participating in his best event, which was the 100-meter. And people called him unpatriotic. People criticized him for this decision. But he had a personal conviction, I don't want to run on Sundays, just because that's something for him that felt like work. And so he wanted to stop and have that one day. And so they offered him entrance into the 400-meter, which was like his third best event. And then also in the 200 that he was already going to be in as well. And so in the 200, he ended up winning bronze, but he wasn't as good at the 400, so nobody was expecting him to do that well. And so he gets himself in a position, and it's like almost cinematic. There's bagpipes playing in the background. He gets like an encouragement from somebody right before in this letter, just letting him know that God's going to honor him for this. And then he gets up and he wins the gold with a time of 47.6 seconds. And that story has been immortalized in the 1981 Academy Award-winning film Chariots of Fire, which some of you who's seen that film, like 5 of you, right? It's great, though. Honestly, it holds up. It's still really good. I love that film. But when he was interviewed in real life about his experience running the 400-meter as a sprinter, one of the things that he said was, the first half I ran as fast as I could. That's as far as he usually runs. And then he says, the second half I ran faster with God's help. And whether or not you're convicted to physically run or not on Sundays, like some of you are like, I'd be happy to not run on Sundays. I share that conviction, actually every day, for all that matters. And some of you are like, but running brings me joy. Like, we're going to get to that in just a moment. That's not really what it's about. But when we live in a culture where it feels like we're running through our week, for Monday all the way through Sunday, and then we pick up and we do it again the next week and the next week on what feels like an endless treadmill, running through work and parenting and relationships, going from one week to the next without a break, hoping that maybe a vacation will save us, but it never feels like enough by the time we get to the end of it. And most of us just are running and running and running. We just don't know how to stop. And we're physically paying for it. We're emotionally paying for it. The data shows that as a culture. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But the question we want to consider today is, in light of that story and in light of our scripture reading for today, what if God designed Sundays, in this series we're calling Resurrecting Sundays, what if God designed Sunday as a day for you to take a rest for a moment from the race, to slow down, so that maybe you can run even better and be even more productive on the rest of the days of your week? What if you took one day off and believed that God could get more done with 6 days than you could get done with 7? And so we're in week 3 of our April teaching series called Resurrecting Sunday. And it's all about how one day each week has the potential to make you less distracted, like we talked about last week, less exhausted, like we're going to talk about this week, and less lonely, like we're going to talk about next week, and more alive as a whole than ever. And so today we're going to explore how Sundays, or whatever day you practice something called a Sabbath, which we're going to talk about today, how Sundays can make you less exhausted and more rested as you head into the rest of your week, including the best 6 tips of wisdom that I've learned from 15 years of practicing one day of rest each week since when I was a single college student all the way to now being a dad of 3. How many years am I into marriage? 13 years into marriage right now. I've been doing this for a long time. And so our teaching text for today is Mark chapter 2, 23 through 28. If you've never opened a Bible before, church is a great place to try. There's a table of contents in the front. Mark is one of 4 gospel accounts we have of the life, death, resurrection, ministry of Jesus. Mark is the shortest one. And Mark often highlights episodes from the life of Jesus that happened on something called the Sabbath. And that's what we're going to see in today's text. It says this in Mark chapter 2, 23 through 28. It says, on the Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to make their way, picking some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, have you never read what David and those who were with him did when he was in need and hungry, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priest, and also gave some to his companions. Then he told them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So then the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. The word of the Lord. We're going to come back to this text in a moment, but humans, ever since work became toilsome, like we talked about this in another series on a biblical theology of work, that work is a good thing that God has given us, but what happened from Genesis 3 onward is sin entered the world, and work took on a new quality, and it took on the quality of toil. And as a result, ever since then, people have been prone toward feeling exhausted, tired, burned out by both the demands of paid work, but also stuff at home. And the reason is because as human beings, we are not made for a rhythm of working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But we are not the first generation, our generations, to feel tired and exhausted. This is not new. If you go all the way back in the Old Testament, shortly after Genesis 3, if you go to the book of Exodus, in Exodus you have God's people who are known as Israelites or the Hebrews. They were living in Egypt. They were slaves of the Egyptians, living in a 24/7, 365 work culture. And they were being literally worked to death. And one of the things you see in the Exodus story is they worked for people who sometimes would even make their work harder. There wasn't vacation time. There wasn't employee handbooks. There wasn't PTO for them. They just had to endure this until eventually they escaped from it. And so they were being burned out under the Egyptian sun and under the authority of the work culture that they were in. And it might not be that bad for us now, but we do live in a time where I think a lot of us in this room are feeling the demands of work and home. Even some of you who aren't working yet, and maybe you're still in school, high school, or college, it feels like there's more homework than ever, and you're feeling all of this. And a lot of people are starting to crumble under the pressure of all these demands. Right now with work, people need more work than ever, it feels like, just to meet the expenses of modern life in a city. Even a city like Pittsburgh, which is cheaper than a lot of other cities, it still can be hard. Or for many people, work is a form of identity, where for some of us, it's like you don't know who you are apart from your work. And so if you're not working, it's like, well, who am I? And so we keep working because it fulfills a need for identity and security in us. And then at home, those of you who are parents, there's increasing pressure on parents to just do more and more for your kids, as we talked about last week. More things to participate in, more things to do. And so parents are burning out. They're burning out their kids at the same time. And one writer a couple of years ago called millennials, which is the generation I'm a part of, the burnout generation. And I'm sure Gen Z will also be called that, and the generation after that will be called that. But the New York Times shared a survey of 1,500 adults back in 2021, so shortly after the pandemic, and it said more than half were feeling burned out because of job demands. And what they meant by that was feeling chronic, unmitigated stress. And this isn't just like an American Western phenomenon. You see this in Japan, where we have a partner church as well. In Japan, overwork is such a problem that it's become a political conversation. And there's even a word in Japanese for death by work, and it's the word karoshi, which is so, and again, because it's a theme in the work culture of Japan. And so a lot of us feel this. We feel like, yeah, I know I'm working too much, or I know I'm working too much of the week, and I know I have demands and I have chores at home and all these different things, but I just don't know how to escape from it. And so there's a lot of different ways we try to escape from it. Some of us, we just, you have moments where I know people have done this where you just quit everything. And for a little bit, that solves it. And it makes it go away, and you feel rested. But then you start to feel it again. Or other people, it's like, man, my vacation and my PTO, like if I can just maximize that, use all that, like that's going to get me everything I need. I'm going to come back rested and rejuvenated, and then I'm going to be able to get back into it. Others are like, I'm made different. I don't need rest like everybody else. I'm a firstborn. I get everything done. I can keep being productive, whatever it is, until you can't eventually, and you're forced to get rest, and we aren't sure how to find it. But in this episode from the Gospels, we're introduced to a biblical alternative to the culture of high demands and overwork that makes people feel desperate for rest. And it's called the practice of Sabbath. Everybody say Sabbath. That word might be new to you. Maybe it's a word you're familiar with or a word you've heard in some context. But if you're ever reading through the Gospels and maybe you're new to the Bible and you're like reading through a gospel, there's sometimes these moments where you're reading and you're like, what are they even talking about? Like there seems like there's a lot of assumptions that are being made. And the reason is there are a lot of assumptions being made. The Gospels were unfolding in a first century Jewish culture that's rooted in that whole first half of the Bible called the Old Testament, which sets up the culture in which Jesus enters into. And Jesus is a Jew living with Jewish practices in first century Jewish world. And we find out in this text that this episode is unfolding on the Sabbath day, which is a Jewish practice. But the main biblical background for Sabbath comes from something in Exodus chapter 20 called the 10 Commandments. A lot of people are familiar with that. Maybe they couldn't name them all. I don't think I could name all 10 Commandments, but the fourth one speaks about Sabbath. And listen to what this says. So Israel has just come out of Egypt, just for context. They've just come out of Egypt, just come out of slavery. Moses has now come off Mount Sinai with 10 Commandments. And this, when he gets to the bullet points, he gets to the fourth commandment, this is what he says. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who is within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and declared it holy. Walter Brueggemann, who was one of the most famous Old Testament scholars of the past 50 years, says that Sabbath and this practice, this command that God gave to them, was a practice of resistance to the work culture of Egypt that was still in their bones. You know, when they left Egypt, like, you can leave Egypt, but Egypt stayed in their hearts. That working all the time, thinking, I got to be doing something. There's somebody watching me. Maybe God now is the new taskmaster who's making sure that everybody's getting something done. But God knew that they still had Egypt in their bones, so he gave them a new commandment to say 1 day a week, you're to rest and to practice resting, to not do anything, to enter into a more human rhythm, which reflects God's own rhythm when he created everything and he rested on the seventh day, not because he needed it, but to set the culture for what the rest of us were going to need as well. And I've always loved the short and sweet definition from a pastor named Eugene Peterson that our family has always used to define Sabbath. He defines Sabbath this way, that Sabbath is a day to play and pray. Sabbath is a day to play and pray. Play is the opposite of work. It doesn't mean you have to literally go like play on a jungle gym or something like that. Play is a word that you mean for the opposite of work. And if work is not just what you're paid to do, but stuff you have to do, play you don't have to do. This is just doing something just for the fun of it or the joy of it or because it gives you life. And then prayer is part of it as well, to remind us that the Sabbath day is not just meant to be about us and our enjoyment, but about enjoying God as well and pointing our eyes back toward him. The main principle of Sabbath, though, if positively it's a day to play and pray, negatively, the main thing that it is it's about not working 1 day in 7. So instead of working all 7 days a week, the main principle of Sabbath is 1 day, at least a 1 day weekend, when you don't work and don't do anything. But by the time of Jesus, there are a lot of traditions that began to be added on to this commandment about not working on the Sabbath day. The Pharisees were good guys at heart. They really wanted to honor the Lord's commands. They knew God's commands. They wanted to usher in a new time of renewal, spiritual renewal in Israel. So they really made a point to know the commands of the Bible. But one of the things that they did as well is they also built a lot of traditions around those commands. So for example, it says on Sabbath, don't work. But they were thinking, well, what does it mean to work? And we don't want to work because we'd be breaking the command. And so let's add some traditions around those commands about not working. And so by the time of Jesus and the years after, there were a lot of traditions that were built up about what counts as work. For example, here's some of those rules that were right around the time of Jesus. No kneading, no baking, no slaughtering animals, no hammering, no dyeing wool or weaving, no performing strenuous activity, no traveling, no worrying. It's like some of you literally traveled too far to get to church for that rule this morning. No worrying. Some of you are breaking it right now. No earning money, no tying a knot, no plowing, no planting or harvesting. That's the rule that Jesus and his followers were getting in trouble for, because it wasn't just like they were picking a snack. They're like, that counts as harvesting. You're breaking the Sabbath. No lighting or extinguishing a fire. I remember I visited a synagogue in New York one time, and the tour guide asked us if we knew what this substance was up by the front, and nobody knew what it was except for this German lady who shouted out after she smelled it. She's like, that's tobacco. And the point was that there was tobacco you could take and chew because you weren't allowed to light a match. And so they actually had tobacco right there in the synagogue for somebody. But also, no writing more than one letter of the alphabet. Some of you are taking notes right now, and you already messed that up. No cutting fingernails. I hope you're not doing that. No boiling eggs. No putting out a lamp. No getting a haircut an hour before the Sabbath. And again, the heart behind these rules is they don't want to break God's command. It's like, I want to honor the do not work. But over time, it starts to lose the point. And so by the time of Jesus, not working for most people was starting to feel like a lot of work. And the Pharisees were kind of like the religious police that were like, hey, let's make sure everybody's not working. So nobody was having any fun on the Sabbath. But Jesus reminds us here about the heart of the Sabbath. and what it's all about. And listen to what he says in this situation where they're accusing him of breaking the Sabbath because they plucked some grain. He says, then he told them, and this is the guiding principle for how we think about rest, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man, Jesus is talking about himself, is the Lord even of the Sabbath. And so what he's reminding them as somebody who grew up in the Jewish world, as a Jew, two Jews primarily who he's speaking of right now, he says, God created the practice of Sabbath as a day for you because he loves you. The Sabbath had become a way to condemn people, a place of condemnation rather than a place of invitation, of saying God loves you enough. He knows that you're human. He sees how hard you work. God loves you enough to set aside one day in your life as a gift. This should be the easiest command to keep, a gift to say, don't work for one day. And science actually backs up this ancient practice of taking one day in 7 to simply rest from work. Sabbath is one day each week to play and to pray instead of work. One day that can leave you feeling less exhausted and more rested. But for some of you, it might open up some questions. If you're reading closely to the commandment I just read, it might open a question like this. Like that command about rest, I get it, cool. But that command says you're supposed to rest on the 7th day, which is Saturday. This series is all about the first day of the week, or Sunday. Should this be Resurrecting Saturday? Like, are we getting this wrong in this series? And like, when are you actually supposed to practice a Sabbath? Some of you are like, I don't care about that question at all, nerds, like, like whatever it is. But some of you are thinking about it, and I was thinking about it. Like, I did a lot of reading on this, and I was like, you know what? I've never really thought about that. How did this become on Sunday, and it feels like it was Saturday? And here's what I found out. It's complicated on how we got there. I'm going to give you a really simple take on it, though. In Exodus, in the verse what we just looked at, it says the Sabbath was on the 7th day. Okay, so God created everything in a week, 7th day he rested, told the Israelites, 7th day you're supposed to rest as well. And that's what it was until the time of Jesus. Even Jesus and his followers were practicing that for the most part as well. And it even seems initially that the Christians, who many of whom were Jews and coming out of Jewish culture, were also practicing that as well because they had a lot of overlap with the Jewish world. But over time, as Christianity grew in size and influence exponentially over the first 300 years, from this marginalized religion of about 120 people to quite a few more through basic witnessing and conversations and preaching of the gospel, eventually Christianity grew to a substantial point where many people were starting to see Sunday as a day of rest because that was the day they gathered as a church, they got together, the day that Jesus rose from the dead. And so Constantine, who was emperor of the Roman Empire around that time, began to recognize that these Christians were already beginning to practice Sunday as a day of rest. And so in March of 321, he made it official with an edict. And it said this, on the venerable day of the sun, which is what I would like you to call Sunday from now on, he says, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest. Let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture I'm not going to read all that. But the point is, he gets into some details about some nuance for agriculture, some situations. Even within this legal edict, he's saying there's still room within that. And it wasn't what made Sundays into rest. Sometimes they're like, well, if Constantine, he didn't make it into rest. Christians were already doing this, and he simply began to recognize what was already happening within the empire. And over time, it became the widespread practice among Christians that Sunday, for us, is Sabbath day. But you might be wondering, does it have to be on Sunday? Like, should it be on Saturday or Sunday? Believe it or not, there's a group of Christians that have split off by insisting that it should be Saturday, others who have insisted that it should be Sunday. And according to the Bible, it's not a hill that you should die on. Some of you are like, I didn't even know that debate ever happened. You'd be amazed at how much Christians have to argue about over the past 2,000 years. This is one of their favorites at one point. But here's the thing. I think according to the Bible itself, not a hill you should die on. It seems like even in the New Testament, as you have all these Jewish believers who are following Jesus as a Jewish Messiah, they're beginning to wonder, like, okay, where does Sabbath fit into all this? And they have all these Gentiles coming in, which is everybody else who are non-Jewish Christians coming into the church. They're trying to figure out, like, do we do Sabbath? Do we do it on Saturdays? Like, what are we supposed to do? He begins to address it in Romans 14, but even more specifically in a letter called Colossians, in Colossians 2:16 through 17, listen to how he directly addresses it. He says, therefore, don't let anyone judge you in regard to food or drink or in a matter of festival or a new moon. And then he says, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of what to come, or what is to come. The substance is Christ. Now, some have read that and be like, the point of this is that we don't need a Sabbath at all. But I will tell you, the design of your body will let you know eventually that Sabbath is a good thing. But what I think he is saying is that whatever day it is for you, Jews or Gentiles, whatever this looks like, don't be legalistic about it and judge somebody else for when they practice the Sabbath. In the end, it feels like Paul is saying, keep the principle of Sabbath, which is 1 day in 7, but you're free to apply it differently on this side of Jesus. You're still human, which means that you still need a day of rest in order to thrive and flourish. But what's less important is when you do it, and is more important is that you actually do it. Listen to what Pete Scazzero says in his book on emotionally healthy spirituality. He says, the traditional Jewish Sabbath begins at sundown on Friday, ends at sundown on Saturday. In most Christian traditions, Sabbath has been observed on Sunday. The Apostle Paul considered one day for Sabbath as good as another. So the particular day of the week does not matter. What matters is to set aside a 24-hour period and protect it. And so for most people, it's going to be Sunday. Like today, for most people, is your Sabbath. But if you work at a church like me, as much as I like to think this is restful, like what I'm doing right now, it is enjoyable. I love it. There's a lot of life being given here, but it also is the first day of my work week. And so for my family, we've always rested on Saturday. We often will start on Friday night, go to Saturday evening, but most people in the church will do Sundays. But if you serve a lot in the church, maybe Saturday is a better day for you. And so again, remember the principle here that Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. This is a gift, God's gift to you, to free you from endless cycles of work and into a better kind of productivity that flows from a deep rest that you can find 1 day a week. And so regardless of the day, here's the principle today. Lock a consistent 24-hour Sabbath into your calendar and throw away the key. Lock a consistent 24-hour Sabbath into your calendar and throw away the key. I encourage you to do so on Sunday, unless you really serve really consistently at this church, then try Saturday or change it up. Sometimes it needs to be Saturday, sometimes it needs to be Sunday, but consistency can help. You could do evening to evening. You could start Saturday evening, go all the way through Sunday evening. You could do midnight to midnight, all day Sunday, but figure out what works for you and your family. And one of the things that I've always heard, I've shared this in a billion sermons, is that the first person to your calendar wins. And so if you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't need to lock it in, I'm just going to hold it there mentally, and at the end of this week, I'm sure I'll have time. You will never have time for a Sabbath. Something will always come up, a conversation will always happen, something will always get added onto the calendar, and it will never happen accidentally, unless you intentionally decide, I'm going to set 1 day apart. And like I said, for most people, it's going to be Sundays, and it's going to have church right in the heart of it. But once you set it apart, how do you actually practice it? I've been somebody who started, I don't even remember why, but 15 years ago as a college student, I started practicing Sabbath. Probably read it in a book, probably heard it in a sermon like this, and I'm like, I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to start practicing Sabbath. And so I took 1 day each week starting as a single college student, and we've continued mostly continuously now as a family of 5. And what I want to do is share with you 6 bits of wisdom. These are not rules, because the Bible does not give us a lot of rules in the New Testament about how to practice this well, except just don't work. But I'm going to give you 6 bits of wisdom that will help you apply that in your life and help you practice Sabbath once you've figured out when it's going to be. So once you've locked it into your calendar, here are 6 practices that can help you do this. First thing is do an hour of preparation if you can't get a day. Do an hour of preparation if you can't get a day. In the Jewish world, there was a day of preparation for finishing up work for the week. So at the end of the week on Friday, you would finish up all your work for the week. You'd tie up loose ends at work. You'd get your inbox down to 0. You'd pay all your bills, all that kind of stuff. You'd do any household chores you needed to do so that you could rest on the Sabbath. And for some people, maybe because of the way your 2-day weekend works, you can really get a solid day of preparation in where you do a lot of chores. For most people, here's what I would suggest. Start with just an hour of preparation. Start with an hour of preparation. Some people, I don't know who you are, you don't have to raise your hand, but some people can relax in a messy house. They're like, I'm fine. I just sit back. And other people are like, I cannot relax unless the house is clean. And so here's the thing, is it can be helpful, if that's you, to make a chore list that can help you relax on the Sabbath. So for example, on the day before, take 1 hour and do as much as you can, whether it's folding and putting away clothes, doing dishes, paying bills, cleaning rooms, vacuuming, mowing the yard. For me, I remember I would do homework, make sure I had my homework done, or I'd save it for Sunday. And here's what I will suggest, though, is that what you'll find is that if you have a pre-Sabbath to-do list, you'll never get to the end of it in time. There will always be another thing, and if you think, I can't start resting until I get through my to-do list, you will never rest. And so one thing that I recommend is you either have a fixed time, 5 o'clock, that's when Sabbath starts or whatever, or when I wake up, or you just set a timer for an hour. And you say, how much cleaning can we get done? And so as a family, sometimes we'll just take an hour. Even with our kids, we'll say, you have 15 minutes. We're going to put on dance party music. Just go clean. And 1 out of 3 of them does that. So I'll let you decide which one. It's the firstborn. So do an hour of preparation if you can't get a day. Second thing is write up a to-don't list. Write up a to-don't list. Some of you are really good at to-do lists. Some of you put things on your to-do list after you've done them. Just so you can write it down. But what we also need in our lives is a to-don't list. And built into the Sabbath is stopping activity or work. And you can think of work, again, as anything you have to do, not just what you're paid to do. And so to help you with that, it can be helpful to have a to-don't list, which is the opposite of a to-do list. But let me give you the caveat here. This is actually exactly what Jesus ran into, is people who had a really long to-don't list, and they had no enjoyable things, no fun things on it. It was just a to-don't list. And what happens with a to-don't list is sometimes you can get to the point where it tends toward legalism and restrictive rules that forget the whole point of why those rules actually exist in the first place. That's what happened to the Pharisees. Their to-don't list got very, very long. And this is actually what happens in the church too. The church also has Pharisaical tendencies, and from 300 onward, over time, many Christian cultures especially started to add more and more rules onto the Sabbath where it became harder and harder to follow. And even in America, if you look back and you can look up something called the Blue Laws, you can find a lot of laws about what you could and could not do on Sundays. One of my favorite examples, I was going to list a bunch, but let me just give you one, comes from Boston in 1656. There's a guy named Captain Kemble. He was just returning from a 3-year voyage, and he was met by his wife at the doorstep of his house, very romantic. He kissed her, and it happened to be on a Sunday. Somebody saw it, and then he was condemned to 2 hours of humiliation in the public stocks for his public display of lewdness on the Sabbath. Here's what I want to say, is that it is not lewdness to kiss your wife or kiss your husband on the Sabbath day. Don't put it on your list. Like, you might have on your to-don't list, like, don't kiss me. But, like, whatever, like, it's not lewdness. PDA is okay. So, but here's the thing. It's not wrong to have a to-don't list, but you just have to keep it in its place. In particular, don't force your to-don't list on somebody else. That's what the Pharisees were doing. They had their own to-don't list, like, we can't get grain for snacks. Like, okay, that's your to-don't list, but don't force it on somebody else because you'd usually be going beyond the Bible to do so. So what's on your list might not be on somebody else's, and that's okay, because what feels like work for you might feel like rest for somebody else. So, for example, running was on Eric Liddell's to-don't list because he ran a lot. For some of you, like, running's the one thing that I want to do on Sundays, and I really enjoy that. It gives me life. Or in college, homework and work was on my to-don't list, so I didn't do homework on Saturdays. I tried to finish it up on Fridays or Sundays. But now my to-don't list includes sermon prep and my email and other ministry responsibilities. Like, if you email me on a Saturday, you will get an automatic reply that says I'm on Sabbath. Many of you have gotten that before, and I see it as an educational opportunity to let everybody know about Sabbath. Third thing is this, is bookend your Sabbath with fun traditions. One of the things, again, traditions can get out of hand, especially if they're not fun, which is what happened with the Pharisees. But without traditions, I found that it's easy for Sabbath to kind of blend in with all the other days. You need a way sometimes to separate out this day from other days, to set it apart. Otherwise, it can start to blend in. And so it's good to have some fun traditions at the beginning, end, or both, to separate out that day. And over time, you might add some on. But if you're doing this with a family, I just want to say kids love traditions. They will remind you of traditions that you forgot existed. But I just want to give you a few from my family, and I want to use some of these things over here to tell you about it. And so we start our Sabbath on Friday evening, and so we often kick it off with a meal. We use this cutting board here, and we make homemade sourdough pizza every Friday night. We have done this faithfully since about 2020, when at the end of the week, I was like, I hate everyone, and I need a way to process my week. So I would make sourdough pizza. So if I'm making a lot of sourdough, you could ask, how am I doing emotionally? But we would make sourdough pizza a lot. And we've been using the same recipe for basically since 2020. And I like it because it's really low work. And so at least somewhere during our Sabbath, we'll do that, and we'll make it to kick off our Sabbath. And if you're like, I want to get into sourdough, I have a whole Google Doc that has more information than you ever want to know that I've shared with a lot of people. But here's what I recommend. At some point, and usually at the beginning or end, have a feast. Don't count calories. On Saturdays, we'll also do a big breakfast that's different than our normal breakfast. One of the other things we'll do is right after we get the pizza out and get everything ready, we'll get this candle out and we'll light it. And my kids love this part of it. There's an argument always about who gets to light it. None of them are strong enough to use the little clicker. But there's an argument about who gets to blow it out at the end. But we love it. And this is actually a classic Jewish tradition for kicking off Sabbath. So we'll often light a candle. But then we sing a song as well that we made up one time. And I'm going to do that. I almost got so nervous at last service that I was like, never again. I don't know why Justin won't let me join the worship team. I've been trying to get on it for years. But we sing that song like no joke. We sing it. That is our most faithful tradition. Pizza, candle, song. Even when they have friends over, we sing the song, and they don't know enough to be embarrassed by it yet. So we sing it. And then the last thing we do is not every week. Like I want you to think we don't get this right every week. But most of the time, what we try to do is we have this journal. And in this journal, what we do is we write the date for the Sabbath, and then we've been keeping it for a couple of years now, and we write 2 questions. What are you proud of this week, and what are you praying for this week? And so we start with, what are you proud of? Because on the 7th day, God rested, and he looked back on creation, and he said, that was very good. And so we ask our kids, let's look back over the past week, and what was really good? What are you proud of? And we try to notice things for each other, and then we say, what can we pray for? And we write down some things that we're praying for. And let me tell you, this is an incredible witness to the power of prayer now, because we can see the ways that God has answered some highly specific prayers by our family on Sabbath days over the years. And so figure out what that looks like for you. Sometimes we'll add in how we played that day. Sometimes we'll add in how we feasted, what our toppings were on our pizza. But it's an incredible way for us to do that. And so find your own traditions. I know one book I was reading said their traditions are, we always do pancakes and nobody makes their beds. Like, that's it. And so start there. Number 4 is make time for one life-giving thing that you don't normally have time for. Make time for one life-giving thing that you don't normally have time for. And so what's something you don't need to do, but you really love to do, but just don't ever have time to do? Pete Scazzaro calls this making time for Sabbath delight. And so think of these as life-giving activities that restore your soul, that restore you, that reminds you that you're human and there's things that you love to do. Otherwise, what can happen is if you can make only a to-don't list and you never make a Sabbath joy list, it's all about what you don't do rather than how you delight in God and how he's created you. And so Sabbath can become an opportunity for you to get to do things you don't normally get to do. When Jesus healed someone on the Sabbath, one of the things I love that he would often say, that he says in the Gospels, is he would remind people, because people were even criticizing him for that. Like, that's work. And he would remind people, like, no, it's good to save life on the Sabbath. And so even, what are your life-saving, what are your life-giving practices that you can do that maybe you've lost sight of all week or even for the past couple decades? A.J. Sabota says it this way in Subversive Sabbath. He says, our family has summed it up like this when they're asking, what should we do or not do? And they say, is this activity in question life-giving or life-taking? That is, does it bring us life, rest, hope, wholeness, or does it drain us, pour us out, stress us out, or load us down? And so use those questions to figure out, is this life-giving, life-taking, to figure out what kinds of things you make time for you to do and for others in your family to do as well. One Jewish writer on Sabbath named Abraham Joshua Heschel once said that if you work with your hands, Sabbath with your mind. And if you work with your mind, Sabbath with your hands. And so sometimes find a way to play that feels different and engages a different part of you than how you work. I have found that to be so true. But let me get on just a hobby horse for a second here. In our culture, I think we're losing the art of hobbies. And I've heard it said that we live in a culture that turns every hobby into a potential side hustle. Tell me that you're a workaholic when you can't even do something fun without trying to figure out how to make money from it. And that's often what we do rather than just enjoying it, which is what the point of a hobby is. It's just something that you enjoy doing for the sake of it that gives you life. So for example, recently I've taken up watercolor, and you will not be seeing those right now because they are not good. And I will never forget early on, I was trying to get in this habit. I was like, I just want to make time to watercolor. And so I sent the kids outside. They're all playing. I'm sitting on the back porch, and I'm trying to watch the kids, and absolute chaos is unfolding. But I am painting flowers on my porch. And Julie was like, what is happening out there? I was like, I'm painting flowers. The kids are fine. They were not. So they're okay now. But figure out what's life-giving for you. It might be watercolor, it might not be. It might be playing board games, going for a long drive, hiking outside, going fishing, drawing, reading a book that isn't for work or school, taking a long nap, crocheting, running, sleeping in, playing with your kids, playing basketball, getting your hands dirty in the garden. You know, I know yesterday my kids, one of the things that we try to do on Sabbath a lot is say yes to as much as we can, especially if it's free. And so my kids, they really wanted to play out in the rain. And everything in me as a dad is just seeing all the steps that are going to be involved with getting them ready for bed after they play in the rain. And you know what? I tried to say yes, and they were disgusting. And they were out there, but they had a lot of fun. Or I think about Julie last night where we were getting the kids ready for bed, and she's like, I would love to just sit on the back porch while it's raining and read a book. And she made time to do that for a little bit, and we made time as a family so she could do that as well. And so, but as you do, make time for unrushed time with God. And if it's Sunday, make church part of your Sabbath. But if it's another day because you serve a lot in church or for whatever reason, make space for God on your Sabbath without an agenda. Number 5 is to let your screens rest too. Let your screens rest too. This is something that Andy Crouch encourages in his book, The Tech-Wise Family. He says that what we should do in our digital culture is take 1 hour each day, 1 day each week, 1 week each year when we just turn everything off for just a moment. And so in particular, I would encourage you to use this day to delete your social media apps or log out of them as best as you can and put your phone down. And let me say, this is the one, of all these 6 practices, this is the one we're the worst at as a family. We're still trying to get this habit down, but I've heard of people who go and find all the screens in their house and put them in phone jail, which is just like a box for the day. Maybe just keep one person's phone out on Do Not Disturb so somebody can get in contact with you and know that you're alive. So, but here's the thing. If you tell your kids you're trying not to be on your phone on Sabbath, they will remind you many, many times. And so we're not legalistic about screens, though, and we ask, is this screen taking us apart or is it bringing us together? So sometimes we'll do a movie together on Friday nights or on Saturday, and we'll have a shared kind of screen time together and introduce them to classics like we did last week. Air Bud was the one we watched last week, and you know what? It doesn't hold up. So I'd say a lot more about this. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, but my friend Julian Cisnero is going to be here, and he's pioneering a movement called Analog Sunday, and he's going to be here this Wednesday night to talk about how you can unplug 1 day each week. This isn't just for families. This is for young adults, teenagers, older folks, like whoever you are. If you want to take 1 day each week and recover your life, we can't wait to see you at this event. So he's going to share his story, how he got to this point. We've only got about 20 spots left. It's 60 spots for this. And so we would love to see you there. And we'll have a Polaroid camera to give away so you can go a little bit more analog on Sabbath as well. Final practice is this, is find your Sabbath support group. Find your Sabbath support group. Because if you're a recovering workaholic, you're going to need a support group. And it is easier to practice Sabbath when you have people in your life, friends and family, who are also committed to it with you the same day each week, as often as possible. And so it might be your everyday group. It might be a few friends from church. It might be a couple other families, some people that you're talking with or sitting with even today. But almost every book I've read on Sabbath says this is almost impossible to do if you're just trying to do it in isolation. You need to include other people in this practice. And you might be thinking, like, that's nice, but I'm an introvert, and people are what exhausts me. Like, there are no life-giving people in my life. I just need a minute. You know, don't amen that, because there are people near you. But you're like, I just want to be alone. And what I found, though, is that it doesn't mean you need to fill your whole day with other people. Sometimes just knowing some people that are also trying to do that as well. But it's good to have a little bit of time with others and a little bit of time on your own as part of your Sabbath. And in particular, what I recommend is make some time for restful friends on Sabbath. Maybe people who are also practicing Sabbath. Don't publicize your list of restful friends, which ones are restful and which ones are not. But it might be a meal together, letting your kids hang in the backyard. But find some people who are mutually life-giving, that every time you spend time together, you guys both end just with lots of laughter or just feeling rested. And Amanda's going to talk even more about relationships on Sundays and how this can help you make you less lonely next week. And so those 6 steps might help you get started. But if you want to go deeper into all of this, we are offering a 4-week course on the Sabbath practice from Practicing the Way and John Mark Comer starting Wednesday, April 29th. It's going to be over here. It's a video course. We've got room for some more people still, but it is going to be a course that's going to help you figure out how do you build this into your lives in rhythms starting now. This past weekend, I got around to reading an interview with Ben Sass in the New York Times. It was part of their podcast, one of the New York Times podcasts, and they were interviewing Ben Sass. And he's a former senator from Nebraska. He was a college president before he was senator and a college president of an even bigger college after he was senator. He's also a married dad of 3. And last year, he was diagnosed quite unexpectedly with pancreatic cancer and not given very long to live. It's pretty much a death sentence. And so near the end of the interview, we go through a lot of different things. They talk about politics, they talk about culture, they talk about digital tech. But at the end of it, this is the question he gets asked. He gets asked, is there any advice that you would give to somebody who is the Ben Sass father of 3 at age 40 or age 35, when the kids are young and everything's stressful and chaotic in light of where you are now? So you can imagine he's going through a lot. He's end of life. He's thinking about some of these things. Like, what would he want to say? So many things he could say, but listen to what he said. First response, he says, I'm happy to go fire hose on this one. Number 1, honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. Man, I wish I treated the Lord's Day differently over the course of my life. I've always known it, believed in it, and thought maybe next week we'll get better. And we've been at Sunday worship every morning forever, and we talked about that last week. But man, am I tempted by 12:45 or 1:30 in the afternoon to get back to work or to an addictive level, work about the NFL. Boy, I would treat Sabbaths differently, and especially digital intrusions into the Sabbath. All the things he could have said, looking back on people and saying, if I could tell my younger self anything different, it would be to really prioritize this and to lock it into my calendar. And that's my encouragement to you while you still got a chance. Find a 24-hour period of time, once a week, that you can set apart in your calendar, not because Jesus is making you, because he's inviting you to do this. And try some of those 6 steps. And the thing is, you don't have to wait till next weekend to get started. You can start this habit with the rest of your day. Can you take some time today and take maybe a break from chores together as a family and just until the sun goes down and just say yes to something and go do something that gives you guys life after church? And let me tell you, this is really hard to build into your life at first, but it gets easier over time to the point where now as a family, we don't get it right all the time, but it feels very natural for us to do this, and it feels very unnatural when we skip it. As we close, here's what I want to remind you, is that Sabbath alone can't save you. We live in a time where a lot of people are feeling physically exhausted, and we're getting back to ancient practices like Sabbath, hoping that maybe that's going to give me the rest I need. Maybe that's going to give me the life that I'm made for. But on its own, Sabbath is just a pointer. On its own, it can't get to the root of the problem. Yes, it can make you less physically exhausted, but Sabbath at its best, whether it's on Saturday or Sunday, is an experience of rest that can point you to the deeper rest that you long for, that only Jesus can give you. St. Augustine is famous for saying that our hearts are restless until we can find rest in him, referring to Jesus. And at the end of this passage, Jesus, the Lord of the Sabbath, the one that all the Sabbath is meant to point toward, listen to what he says. In a paraphrase from the Message, Matthew chapter 11, 28 through 30, it says, are you tired? Hear this invitation personally. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. On this Sunday, that's the invitation Jesus is giving you right now. Sabbath isn't a condemnation of all the things you're doing wrong. It's an invitation to come and to experience his rhythms. Jesus is alive. He's here in the room through the Holy Spirit. He's inviting you today, not just to practice Sabbath, but he's inviting you to come to him, the one who lived the life you should have lived, died the death you should have died, finished the work we were called to do, rose from the dead, and now sitting at the right hand of the Father, making sure that the right work gets done, is now inviting you to put your faith in him and begin to feel his rest enter into your body and your soul. And then to enter back into Monday, not on your own, not in your own power, but with him. Returning to the story of Eric Liddell in Chariots of Fire, one of my favorite lines from the movie version, a paraphrase of something he said, but listen to what he says. He says, I believe that God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. Each of you in this room, God has made you for a purpose. Some of you, whatever run is for you, you've got things that you can do that blow me away when I hear about what you do with your work lives or the types of things you can produce. And man, when you do those and you're doing those according to God's rhythm, you will feel his pleasure. But where it starts is God also made you to rest, to slow down one day each week. And what will happen is when you get back to work, when you start running again, you're going to feel his pleasure, not just because of what you do, but because of what you just remembered that he has done for you. Sam's going to lead us into a time of communion where we remember what God has done for us in the person of Jesus. And then we're going to respond with worship and prayer ministry and just invite the Holy Spirit to give you some of that rest that you're desperately longing for.